Is anyone talking yet? Because I don't hear anything.
Morning, Gordon. I can hear you. I don't hear anything from them either.
Okay, great. Sorry, I was curious. Make sure it wasn't me.
I had asked Adam and he said he heard me, but I haven't heard them.
Yeah, I hear both of you. So, oh, I guess the chair hears us.
Tested my audio. It worked. Everybody's here.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can hear us now. We are getting underway. Good morning. Welcome back to day 2 of our October 2025 commission meeting. Today is Friday, October 24th, 2025. My name's Alan Lazo, and I will be chairing today's meeting. Adam, could you please continue the meeting?
Certainly. Morning, Chair Lazo, commissioners, guests, community members, and staff. Thank you for joining us for day 2 of the Land Conservation and Development Commission's October 2025 meeting. My name is Adam Buell. I'll make a note of a few things, including best practices for participation. Recordings of the Commission's meetings are available on YouTube. For those individuals joining us via Zoom, please use the public comment sign-up form on our website. While 3 minutes for public testimony is typical, the chair may reduce the time according to the number of people signed up to testify and other scheduled demands. Zoom participants, please rename yourselves with first and last name so we can identify you and bring you forward at your opportunity to speak. Zoom participants will be in listen-only mode until called on to testify. Again, we thank you for being here with us today. Chair Lazo, the meeting is yours.
Thank you, Adam. Could you please call the roll?
Certainly. Commissioner Bennett?
Present.
Commissioner Boyer?
He has an excused absence this morning. Commissioner Boyer does.
Commissioner Porter?
Here by Zoom.
Commissioner Thompson?
I'm here also by Zoom.
Commissioner Warren?
Present.
Chair Lazo?
Morning, I'm present.
Chair Halova.
Yeah, Chair Halova is also has an excused absence this morning.
Quorum is present.
All right. We'll move on now to the first agenda item today, which is item number 6, the initiation of wetlands rulemaking. I know Gordon is connected there. So Gordon, could you please introduce your team this morning?
Thank you, Chair Lazo. This morning, we're going to be, this first item, item 6, is the initiation of wetlands rulemaking for provision of housing and other needed development outside of wetlands prior to, as part of that process of an urban growth boundary amendment or otherwise development of urbanizing, but not yet urbanized lands for cities. So at this point, I will turn it over to Kevin Young, our senior urban planner, who will be joined by Amanda Putton, our natural resources specialist, and also online is Melissa Ahrens, our Mid-Willamette Valley regional representative, to continue with this presentation.
Thank you, Gordon, and good morning. My name is Kevin Young, Senior Urban Planner. Happy to be with you this morning, Chair Lazo and Commissioners. So let's go on to the next slide and we'll get started here. The request here is to initiate what I'll call a fairly narrow and focused rulemaking effort. We're in close coordination with staff from the Department of State Lands and Governor Kotek's office on this. And the focus is really allowing needed development while protecting wetlands. And the reason, the need for this is that current rules require inventory and Goal 5 work prior to development in certain situations if wetlands are present. And Amanda will explain this in much better detail than I can, so I'm not going to belabor that. But that is fundamentally what we're trying to accomplish with this rulemaking effort. Next slide, please. All right, you're going to hear us talk about local wetland inventories a lot. We'll try not to use acronyms. LWIs is a term that you're going to hear to some degree. Local wetland inventories are important for Oregon cities. What they allow is for a city to determine what are locally significant and non-locally significant wetlands, and preserve those important wetlands that provide a lot of important functions for the community, but also allow development in non-locally protected or non-significant wetland areas. Currently, only 32% of cities statewide have a local wetland inventory that's been approved by the Department of State Lands. So that's 78 cities out of 241. Amanda will be talking a little bit about why that has kind of fallen by the wayside in recent years. So I'll turn next to Amanda to explain this in more detail.
Thank you, Kevin, and good morning, Chair Lazo and Commissioners. So for the record, my name is Amanda Punton, Natural Resource Specialist for DLCD. And before I jump into the details of this proposed rulemaking, I'm going to take some time to talk about Goal 5, local Goal 5 wetland protection programs in relation to our statewide protection measures. And next slide, please, Adam. So we have statewide wetland protections that apply to waters of the state, and waters of the state are any wetlands, whether they are mapped or not. DSL, in order to implement this program, requires wetland delineations in order to determine where their jurisdiction is on the landscape when development is going to occur in or near a wetland. And DSL staff oversees the mitigation that must be done if there's impacts to wetlands, and DSL oversight includes certification of wetland mitigation credits that can be used to mitigate impacts to wetlands. The standard for the statewide program is no net loss, meaning that the mitigation can occur elsewhere from the impact. So it typically will occur within like a larger watershed or within the larger watershed. But the point is that it doesn't have to, the impacts don't have to be mitigated where the impact occurs. So when we look at local wetland protection programs, they start with a local wetland inventory, or LWI, which is approved by DSL. And those local wetland inventories include an assessment of wetland function. And that's important because that is, as Kevin mentioned, will distinguish between locally significant and other wetlands. And our Goal 5 program allows and expects local governments to protect those significant wetlands. And so the standard for these local wetland Goal 5 programs is to really keep these high functioning wetlands in place so those functions can benefit the community. So one similarity to the state program is that a delineation might be required by a local code to establish the precise boundary of a wetland, but sometimes that's not always needed if the property owner or developer is really working to avoid the wetland and stays back from the edge of the LWI boundary. And in some cases, the local government will allow impacts to locally significant wetland that exceed the thresholds for DSL permit. In that case, a DSL permit is required. Let me just mention the benefits that these locally significant wetlands provide to cities include flood storage, contributions to water quality, so cold water recharge for surface waters, and also wetlands are an important avenue for groundwater recharge. Next slide, please. Oh, actually, I want to mention one other thing, which is the go ahead. Next slide, please. Yeah. Because these programs are different, the inventories that they use are different, because they serve different purposes. So the statewide wetlands inventory, and I may slip and use the term SWI, does not show many wetlands that exist on the ground. And where the wetlands that are shown, the boundaries can be more general or uncertain. And that's because that in the absence of a delineation or a local wetland inventory, the data that DSL has to work with comes from nationwide data sets. I guess except for one exception is that we do have a statewide data set of predominantly hydric soils, but otherwise it's nationwide data sets. And so it just goes to, it's just the way that unfolds is that the data is not going to be very site specific or even specific on a local government scale. So I want to confess here that I just provided a very oversimplified and clumsy description of the state wetland inventory, just in case any of our colleagues at DSL are listening to me right now. And I certainly didn't do justice to the work that DSL does to maintain the statewide wetlands inventory. So the purpose of the SWI is to really inform DSL and property owners as to when a removal fill permit is required, or where additional site investigation may be needed to figure out whether a permit is required. So local governments are required to use the state wetlands inventory to notify DSL when they receive an application for a development permit that is in a wetland or near a well. So now I move to the local wetland inventory. And so for local wetland inventory, it starts with available data. So it starts with information that comes from the statewide wetlands inventory, but then additional field work is done. And where property access is granted by the property owner, sample plots will be taken to further determine where a wetland boundary is. So because of this additional work, all or most wetlands are shown on a local wetland inventory, and the boundary for the wetlands, the target accuracy is to within 5 meters of what the actual boundary is, which can only be determined with a delineation. So I mentioned before that a local wetlands inventory includes the functional assessment, and that is what distinguishes between the significant wetlands and the non-significant wetlands. And then when a local wetland inventory is completed and approved by DSL, that data then gets incorporated into the state wetlands inventory. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'm going to get back to what this rulemaking is about. And so our rule right now, our administrative rule for this Division 23, which is a set of rules for implementing Goal 5, requires that when a UGB is amended and is expanded to include new lands in which we have evidence that wetlands exist, then the city needs to apply Goal 5. And that basically means following the requirements in the rule for Goal 5, which starts with the local wetland inventory. So the rule also requires local wetland inventories when a city goes through periodic review. And I'm mentioning that because the rule was written in 1996. And at that point, there was the expectation that all cities would go through periodic review. And if that had happened by now, all cities would have local wetland inventories. That did not occur because the legislature changed the requirements for when periodic review does happen and what cities need to do periodic review. And essentially, it's just not a big player anymore in, well, certainly it's not a big player in applying Goal 5 across the state. So why do we have local wetland protection programs? Basically, they provide advanced knowledge of where development really does not belong. And they inform long-range concept planning for new urban areas, and they provide property owners with much better information on the presence of wetlands and thus how those wetlands will influence site development. Next slide, please. All right, so how do things work now? So we're just talking about the UGB amendment example. So a city figures out where they want to expand a UGB, and they go through the public process of adopting that. I'm not talking about the study areas or anything like that. They've decided where the UGB is going to be amended. They're conducting the process for that. Information is provided that indicates that there's a wetland in that expansion area. So then when the UGB amendment is adopted, the city is required to apply the Goal 5 rule, which is conducting a local wetland inventory and identifying and then protecting high functioning wetlands. So this process can take, or has been taking, 2 years, sometimes more. I want to say that some of that is because of the time it takes for Department of State Lands to review those local wetland inventories. Sometimes it's because they are a little backed up in what they can do, and other times it's because the draft local wetland inventory doesn't include all the information that is needed, and so it needs to be kicked back to the consultants, and then so there's a bit of an iterative process there. DSL will be hiring a new an additional staff member come January, and the expectation is that their piece of this process will be accomplished in a shorter time frame. But still, it's a delay. So it's a significant delay if what we want is to get land available for new housing development quickly. Because right now, under our rule, a city can't get to the point of annexing this new urban land and issuing development permits until the Goal 5 program has been completed and adopted. Next slide, please. All right, so what we propose is to allow another option for cities, and that option would say that the cities would basically not allow development in any wetland. So we're not distinguishing between significant and non-significant wetlands because we don't have that information yet. So basically development would stay out of all wetlands, but development could occur in upland areas. And that would happen, while the city was working towards getting their LWI developed and approved. So this would allow, again, development to proceed in upland areas. And it keeps wetland protections in place so that eventually, once we know where the significant wetlands are, then those can be protected. And then the other wetlands can be basically opened up for at least local authorization, and then developers would then work with DSL as needed for impacts to those wetlands. So, yeah, I think I'm good. Next slide, please. So how this would work. So land could be annexed into the city, and DSL approved wetland delineations would be used to identify upland areas. This slide talks about delineations and determinations, and really that's just a difference in how precise that field information is gathered in order to figure out where DSL's jurisdiction is. And then so there's a bit of a synergy here, which works kind of nicely. So the information that comes from these delineations to avoid wetlands can then be fed into the local wetland inventory mapping process. So it's not really lost time or resources. It gets used in the LWI, and it gets used ahead of time in order to determine where development can occur in upland areas. So I want to say when we talk about avoidance, what that means. So for Goal 5 wetland protection, we're talking about preserving vegetation as well as not allowing structures to be built in wetlands. So eventually that would apply, of course, to locally significant wetlands. But meanwhile, this avoidance standard would apply to all wetlands. So no structures or vegetation removal. in wetlands. But we will want to discuss with the Rules Advisory Committee the possibility of allowing exceptions for utilities to traverse wetlands in order to serve upland areas. And with that, I'll pause for questions before I hand it back to Kevin.
Thank you, Amanda. Commissioners, questions? Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. Amanda, a couple of questions. First of all, would it be able to utilize mitigation at any watershed? I mean, say you're going to be doing it in the Willamette Valley, but you found a watershed somewhere in eastern Oregon. Would that be an acceptable exchange, I suppose? My second question, and I see we have a representative DSL, but as a planning director, planners, and I'm going to be meeting with the county planning directors next month, and they've already indicated this is a concern, is that planning directors have to work under and city and county planning directors, the 150-day rule, but state agencies just don't get back to them. And when you mentioned that they're going to be shorter than the 2 years, what is that time frame, or does DSL have any? Can they provide us any idea? Because that's a real friction point when the state agency, the county or city, has to get a decision out, and yet the state agency just never gets back to them, and there they are. So their only option is to turn the application down, and it causes lots of friction point for the folks at the counter. So putting both of those to you, I'd sure appreciate some clarification. And maybe nobody has any idea, and it's just something that we'll have to live with. But it is a real friction point for the planning directors. And I know for county planning directors, and Stuart perhaps can speak, or someone else that's worked closer with city planning directors, whether or not it's frustrating. Counties have to deal with the myriad of state agencies, so it is really frustrating. Thank you.
Chair Lazo and commissioners, thanks for that question, Commissioner Bennett, because I think it allowed me to kind of detangle more what DSL does and the state wetlands program that way, and local programs. So let me first say that this what we're talking about here in our rule does not it's not really get into some of the concerns that you've mentioned, except for we would be relying on delineations in order to for a local government to figure out where a wetland could occur on a property. DSL does have, I believe can't remember if it's in rule or statute, a timeline for completing their review of a delineation, and they often get that delineation reviewed for their designated timeline. When I'm kind of getting to your second question first, I think. So,
Appreciate it.
Then there's this other point that I made about local governments are required to inform DSL if they receive an application for a development that could impact a wetland. But they don't have to wait for DSL to respond to that. And so they would continue to work within the prescribed timeline for a review of their permit. That notification just gives DSL the opportunity to communicate with the city and the landowner about whether there's a wetland nearby or in the middle of where they want to develop, and how they should proceed in their conversations with DSL. So then I'm going to go back to your first question about mitigation and where that could occur. So with what I'm talking about here with our wetlands rule and the kind of an interim avoidance approach before a local wetland program is fully developed and we identify where the locally significant wetlands are, the idea is that you would not have wetland impacts, except for possibly we're talking about maybe impacts in order to allow utilities to traverse a wetland, but you wouldn't have impacts, so you wouldn't be getting to the mitigation part. But in another context, when you're just applying a DSL rule and not a local Goal 5 protections, then DSL does have requirements for where that mitigation occurs. And it's generally in a fourth field huck, if that means anything to you. It doesn't mean a lot to me. Although I do have one example, I think like the mid-reach of the Willamette of the Willamette River is an example of the size of watershed in which mitigation can occur. Again, I am not really the person to explain this. That is for DSL to do, hopefully at some time in the future.
Thank you, Amanda. Commissioner Porter.
Thank you, Chair. Amanda, I've got a few questions, but I'm going to take mine one at a time so I can follow you a little bit, maybe a little bit better. First of all, I've not ever managed, wetland delineation or permitting from a state or county level, but I certainly have from an industrial level and have been through the mitigation process, and so I got some familiarity. What do you see any? Are all these I guess do we want to call them exemptions? I think that's probably too strong of a word. But do you see any room for the Army Corps to step in on any of these decisions? Because I've had to work with both agencies, concurrently in the past, but we haven't spoken of the Corps. Are these just all state wetlands that DSL will oversee?
Chair Lazo and Commissioner Porter, the Army Corps of Engineers requirements for removal fill permits certainly come into play when impacts to waters of the nation occur, and not all waters of the state are waters of the nation. Again, what we are talking about here is wetland avoidance. So through Goal 5 program, the idea is to have a layer of local protection that says some wetlands you just don't impact. And if you're avoiding wetlands, then you're not getting into the realm of requiring either a state removal fill permit or an Army Corps permit.
Okay. Now, can you give us some examples of why this proposed rulemaking has come forward?
Certainly, Chair Lazo and Commissioner Porter. What we've been observing is over the last few years, we've gotten more UGB amendments where there's an imperative to get land available for housing development quickly. In the past, UGB amendments were kind of more of a long-range 20-year planning horizon exercise. So now when the time frame for when a city wants to apply urban zoning and start issuing development permits has gotten very short, we've run into a problem where if a local government is required to develop a Goal 5 wetland protection program within a UGB expansion area, that timeline is longer than desired. And for examples, we've had a few examples in the Willamette Valley and a couple elsewhere in the state where people are frustrated by the order in which this work occurs. And this is something that we recognized was going to be a problem a while ago, and found out that we really had to initiate a rulemaking in order to address the problem. And that's why we're coming to you now for this rulemaking. So
the periodic review, we had talked about that previously. And yeah, I think that some of these wetland decisions can take, up to 2 years. I think usually they're quicker than that, I think. I know all the ones that I have worked on have not taken quite that long, and they were fairly large projects. is there, so you're saying that the periodic reviews just kind of aren't happening, I think is, I don't remember what verbiage you used. Is there any reason why, is there any reason why these local jurisdictions couldn't, start that process, during the periodic review, or maybe even when they start identifying lands for the urban reserves? I mean, are there other avenues to be a little bit more proactive on the local jurisdiction's part?
Lazo and Chair Porter,
I think Deputy
there's certainly
Director
opportunity
Green.
for local jurisdictions to be more proactive. I'll explain some of the barriers to that in a moment, but first I want to make the distinction between what I'm guessing is your experience with DSL review and the time frame. I'm guessing there you might be talking about delineations and not their review of a local wetlands inventory. So because of delineation normally is applying to one wetland or maybe even just one edge, one side of a wetland, because it's really just trying to figure out, where the upland is and where the wetland is and where a DSL permit is required and where it's not. That can happen. Their review of that can happen fairly quickly. It all depends on the size of the delineation that they have to look at. The local wetlands inventory take place over much larger areas, so either citywide or the UGB expansion area wide, and that in the review is different, and that is the type of review I'm talking about that has been taking a long time. Again, I think DSL is on some time constrained timeline for completing delineations, presuming they have all the information submitted when they are reviewing the delineation submitted by the consultant. And so now back to what local
Amanda, I think
Yes.
Kirsten wanted to talk about the
Yeah.
periodic review part of this, so.
Thank you, Gordon.
Chair Lazo, thank you. Gordon, I was just going to toss it to you for the periodic review. Amanda, thank you.
Okay.
Give you a chance to catch your breath.
Yeah, just briefly, periodic review was as Amanda said, was the mechanism by which cities did new local wetland inventories. And first the legislature amended the statute in the late 90s to eliminate most counties having to do it. Then they eliminated cities under 10,000 population in the early 2000s. Then in 2009, with the recession, they dropped the funding for periodic review. And at that point, the commission did not, said if the state can't provide funding, the state is not going to require any new cities to do periodic review because it's an expensive proposition, and cities are strapped for the funds to do this as well as the state. And so as a result, the whole periodic review program has basically fallen by the wayside. And it was originally one of the key aspects of the statewide planning program, that plans that were adopted back in the 80s would get periodically updated, and that hasn't happened. And so that's why, and also in answer to Commissioner Porter's question, cities haven't taken the initiative because they don't have the resources to take the initiative and volunteer to do periodic review, which we are trying to encourage at this point through our technical assistance program, but it's very limited at this point.
Thanks, Gordon. Deputy Director Green, I think, wants to add something to that.
Thank you, Chair Lazo. Just a friendly reminder and shout out to Benton County, who recently opted into conducting periodic review. So, and that is in Willamette Valley, and that, anyway, we'll see how that goes. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Great. Thank you. Amanda, did you have anything that you were going to continue on, or did that answer the second part of Commissioner Porter's question?
I hope that mostly answered Commissioner Porter's question. And let me say that we do have cities around the state who have voluntarily done local wetland inventories. But I'll just note that those wetland inventories are done within a UGB boundary. So when the UGB is expanded, we still have the issue that we're trying to address here, which is then a local wetland inventory and wetland program is needed for that expansion area.
Thank you both Amanda and Gordon and Kristen. Scooching back to Gordon's response, that was a good segue into my last question, which is if we move this process forward and allow them to allow municipalities or local jurisdictions to start development on the upland areas before the local wetland inventory is complete, do we then run the risk of breaking up any potential, connectivity or any other, characteristics that may link wetlands that otherwise would have been caught during that local wetlands inventory process?
Chair Lazo and Commissioner Porter, thank you for that. DSL staff have been very integral in helping us develop this approach. They are comfortable with it. So I believe that if we are avoiding wetlands based on delineations, we are not running the risk of impacting lands that are, maybe like within a wetland mosaic. Maybe that's what you're thinking about, so one area that could affect another wetland. So if we are keeping development to upland areas, then, well, certainly we stormwater issues, impervious surface, all that. I'm not saying that development isn't going to affect wetlands, but it's not going to affect it more than what our rule currently allows.
Man, I just want to check with you and Gordon. How much more presentation do you have? We're about 5 minutes away from, or 9 minutes away from the end of this agenda item. We've got a couple people signed up for public testimonies. How much more presentation do you all have?
I believe Kevin has maybe 5 more slides, but hopefully they will go more quickly than these.
And that'll be in the presentation. Okay. Let's just continue with Commissioner questions. Commissioner Warren.
I'll try to keep this brief. I'm really excited about us taking a closer look at our wetland stuff. I think it's much needed. And I'll also say that cities' LWIs are super outdated. And so I think cities would be excited about having the opportunity to address those moving forward. I don't know about this process that much. And so I would love to learn more. And so that's another reason why I'm excited we're entering into this. When you say that DSL approved wetland delineations or determinations will be used in this proposed approach, who's conducting those delineations in this specific example?
Chair Lazo and Commissioner Warren, consultants, wetland scientists, consultants generally conduct the wetland delineations, and then they submit that to DSL for review and approval.
And that's at the request of the property owner, or is that the request of the city?
In this case, if we're talking about a property owner developer wanting to develop a program, they would be paying for those delineations. The property owner needs to allow access to the property because you have to be on site in order to complete a delineation.
Great, thank you for that. And then just a clarification question. When you say allow utilities to traverse wetlands, what does that mean? Is that boring under wetlands, or is it actively trenching through wetlands?
I think it could be either. I think certainly the least impactful approach is what would be taken. The way, like if you say no development in a wetland, then that might be more of an obstacle than is needed in order to preserve that wetland if we're looking to allow development in upland areas.
Thank you.
Commissioner Thompson, I know you had your hand up. Did your question get answered? Oh, you're back. Thank you.
No,
Thompson.
thank you, sir. I would have to go on way too long to keep us on schedule. I would ask that we have a future agenda item to deal with the issue of wetlands and how they're impacting both the health of waters and lands and the development of housing and commercial industrial, because I think it's a big issue. Friction point is one way to put it. So I think given Commissioner Bennett's graceful turn of phrase, I'd look for us as a commission to address these friction points at some time in the not too distant future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. And The upside is that if we initiate this rulemaking, then we will have that opportunity to continue those discussions as the rules come back before us, with the benefit of some public involvement. All right, Amanda, why don't you go ahead and proceed with your and Kevin's presentation?
At this point, I'm handing it off to Kevin, so take it away.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Lazo, Commissioners. I am sorry to be off camera, but I've had this meeting crash on me a couple of times already. If it does again, I'll phone in. But I also welcome any other member of the team to grab the ball and run with it, because I know we have limited time here. So next slide, please. All right, so with your approval, we will put together a rulemaking advisory committee to inform this work. We've been in close coordination with the Department of State Lands, with the Governor's Office, and we will continue to do so in putting together our rulemaking advisory committee. Our charge here is really a narrow focus on amendments to Division 23 related to wetlands and Goal 5 compliance. Next slide, please. This is a list of the interest categories we're looking for our rulemaking advisory committee, beginning with city planning staff from around the state. We'll be looking for folks from smaller cities, larger cities, and cities within different regions of the state, so we get broad representation there. We need the input of professional wetland consultants. As Amanda mentioned, they are the ones who are out there doing, the delineation work, and typically they're handling the local wetland inventory work as well. We'll invite engagement from League of Oregon Cities. We'll invite engagement from Metro staff. They have, their own program up in that area, and we want to make sure that our rules will work with the Metro program as well. Property owner interests, housing and development interests, environmental advocates. We're inviting a member of our community involvement advisory committee to join. We will have an ex officio member from the Department of State Lands to serve along with us. I think there's been interest expressed by the tribes, and so we will make space for any tribal representatives who want to be engaged in the process. We're also seeking an LCDC liaison to support this effort. Next slide, please. So this is kind of where we've been, if you will. In September, we attended a meeting of the Community Involvement Advisory Committee. And then earlier this month, we attended a meeting of the Local Official Advisory Council. We got good input from both groups, and we've used that to inform this proposal that's in front of you today. If approved, if the commission agrees to initiate rulemaking here, we will move immediately into recruiting and appointing that RAC, hopefully having that established by the end of November. Next slide, please. And then once we're there, we hope to have 2 or 3 RAC meetings, probably once a month, December, January, February. And we'll be refining our rules through that process. Once they're in pretty good shape, we'll have a webinar to solicit public interest in the rules and any kind of feedback that we hear from interested parties. That will set us up well to post the draft rules with the Secretary of State's office on April 1st, an inauspicious date, but it works for us, and it will allow us to go to LCDC public hearing later in April. Following that public hearing, we'll have a final RAC meeting. We'll have a public comment period to further refine those rules, and then hope to have LCDC deliberation and approval by the end of June. Next slide, please. So we have motions here, but before we get into that, I know there's testimony, and also if there are questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, let's do a couple questions from commissioners. Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. I would recommend inclusion of counties, the Association of Oregon Counties, and I know particularly coastal county staff have a very great involvement with wetlands. So I'd suggest expanding the RAC to include those members. Thank you.
Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I would ask that be added that a minority report, at least bullet points, be given to the commission with the report. I think one of the constant themes that I've been getting is that folks attend and their voice is lost between the final staff report and the recommendations to the commission. And as commissioners, I believe it's really important for us to be aware of the concerns. It doesn't mean that necessarily we'll change what the RAC concluded, but I don't think I just have a real strong feeling that it isn't right that the only way they can get their voice is to come and present it to us at the 11th hour when we're at the decision making. I would like it early on the staff report so that I can do my due diligence in following up. So I'm going to ask that, quite frankly, every time we have rulemaking until we get a work session and sort it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I will also say, I'm curious, Commissioner Bennett, are you asking for a separate document? Because what I'll say is my experience has been with staff reports that follow rulemaking that they tend to embed at least those topic areas that are in contention. And so, it alludes to the fact that there's been a discussion or this point has come up and here's how it was addressed, but it's not necessarily identified in the same way that you're talking about, like specifically. So either are you asking for a separate report or maybe a section that is very clearly, here are the things that, we're, as you said, a minority report or in opposition to the recommendation by the staff?
Yes, and I'm not even asking for something very complex, but I think an executive summary or just the bullet points so that we understand and actually how the decision, was it a consensus, was it a vote, or however, but I think that we need to not have to sift through, I'm looking here at this giant pile, that we each receive.
Yeah.
And it's easy for me to go, okay, and have missed it somewheres, on some of these we're getting, I think the last one was almost 500 pages long. And I just want to, I think as they're preparing it, if they give us a quick summary and then we can look at it and also identify who's, was it AOC and LOC with the concerns such as we discussed yesterday, or was it, a different group? So that's what I'm asking.
Thank you. Appreciate that clarity. All right. So I just wanted to ask one thing. Kevin and Amanda, did you want to cover the charge, or did you kind of cover, I don't know if we need to talk specifically about the charge or if that is embedded in the presentation that you've made?
I would say it's embedded in the presentation. I know the charge was included as an attachment to the staff report, but we would welcome any input on it at this time.
I think you've covered most of what I see in there, but all right. Any other, let's go to public comment. If there's no more clarifying questions from commissioners, we've got a couple people signed up for public comment. So first on the list is Deputy Director Bill Ryan from the Department of State Lands. Deputy Director, are you with us?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I don't know if you can see me or not.
We can see your name.
Oh, okay.
That will have to suffice, I think.
Yeah, I don't see a camera thing here on the Zoom part. But anyway, thank you. Good morning, Chair Laszlo and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Bill Ryan. I'm Deputy Director at the Department of State Lands, and I oversee the Aquatic Resource Management Program, which includes the removal fill law protecting Oregon's wetlands and waterways, as well as Oregon's wetland conservation laws. I'm here to testify in support of the rulemaking. I think this will be an important improvement that will facilitate addition and development of new buildable lands in the urban growth boundaries while protecting wetlands. And it will reduce the time required to provide housing and other development. The Goal 5 process is a partnership between DSL and DLCD, and so DSL will be closely involved in development of the rules. We'll have a representative on the RAC as was shared just now, and DSL will be involved to assure that areas added under the new process do not have wetlands. So making sure that recognizing that there is the potential for some indirect effects. There was the connectivity issue mentioned by Commissioner Porter. And so we'll want to be looking at those as we develop these rules as well. And recognize the desire to hear more about the Oregon's wetlands regulatory and conservation planning process. And I'd be happy to return at a future commission meeting to provide an overview of that if you so desire.
Thank you so much, Deputy Director. We appreciate you providing support this morning and for your partnership in this work. I think that that's a great example of how that partnership can work and work to support the goals of the agency. So thank you so much. And we look forward to hearing more from you. All right, the next person signed up for testimony is Kelly Dasher. Kelly, are you with us?
Chair, I don't see her name in our guest list. She hasn't joined.
Kelly, are you out there? I feel like a medium when I say those things. All right. We will move forward. And if Kelly joins us before we finish deliberating, then we may hear from them. Okay. Anybody else join us that would like to provide public comment on this item that we know of? Okay. All right. Any other additional questions, comments, or discussion before we entertain a motion from the commissioners? I'd be happy to entertain a motion with regard to the initiation of wetlands rulemaking.
Chair, I have a question. Can we put the motion slide back up? I noticed a slight difference that I want staff's opinion on. So in the proposed motion, it's to create an alternative Goal 5 compliance pathway. In the alternative motion, it's to create an optional alternative Goal 5 compliance pathway. Is that difference with the inclusion of optional intentional here, or am I missing something?
I could step in. I think you've caught a slide error. And the word optional is not necessary in the alternative motion. Sorry about that.
No problem, Gordon. I just wanted to double check. With that, I'm comfortable making a motion, Chair, if we're ready for it.
Yeah, please, Commissioner Warren, and I would recommend that you, if you have it in front of you, use the staff report one, or we can direct you to where that word optional should be if you're going to use the proposed motion.
I'm happy to use the proposed motion on the screen. Give me a second. I'll use the one in the staff report.
Yep.
I move that the commission initiate rulemaking to create an optional alternative Goal 5 compliance pathway for UGB expansion areas as described in the staff report. Approve the draft charge included as attachment A and direct the department to appoint a rulemaking advisory committee, recruiting members from categories included in the staff report.
Thank you. Commissioner Warren has made a motion to move forward with initiating the rulemaking. Is there a second? Commissioner Thompson.
I don't have a second. I have a clarifying question.
Yes.
Both Commissioner Bennett and I suggested changes. Would those changes be incorporated with the present motion, or do we need the alternative motion made in order to incorporate the suggestions that Commissioner Bennett and I have made in this discussion?
I think we might want to slightly amend the motion. I think we've done that in the past to say that we will to include the revisions as suggested, revisions to the staff report as suggested in this meeting.
I concur with those changes.
Given that consideration, I would second the motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Thompson. Amanda, did you have something you wanted to?
Chair Lazo, I think the decision you just made makes this moot. I just want to be clear that the part of the rule that we're talking about changing applies to cities when they're amending a UGB amendment. And Commissioner Thompson, I appreciate consideration of counties being involved on the RAC. I'm thinking about what what their relationship to the rulemaking would be, since it has to do with UGB amendments that cities are making. And I just wanted to raise that just in case there was some lack of clarity about what this what this proposed rulemaking would be doing. Thank you.
Sure, if I may.
think, oh, go ahead.
Commissioner Thompson.
Commissioner Bennett knows more about this than I do. I would say counties are active partners with their cities, and that's why I said to include them.
And also, Amanda, as a practical matter, I'm not sure it's statewide, but a lot of counties administer the UGB using the city's zoning or development code. So it's actually the county putting it into place. I don't know if that's statewide, but I'm familiar with it, a lot of the Eastern Oregon counties.
The other thing I'll note is, the slides only provide us a bulleted amount of room to put things. In the staff report, it actually says local government staff with experience and knowledge in Goal 5 wetland issues and local government staff with focus on housing and economic development planning. So it doesn't potentially preclude county involvement. It does say League of Cities, Oregon Cities there, not AOC, but again, I think those first two might also open us up to the opportunity to consult with or to include Oregon counties as well, local government folks.
And Chair Lazo, I think we've gotten the message that we will solicit for county involvement in this rulemaking effort.
Appreciate that, Gordon. Thank you. All right, we have a motion that will include the friendly amendment with regard to the RAC membership, and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Adam, can you call the roll on this?
Commissioner Bennett,
Aye.
Commissioner Porter,
Struggling with this one. I'm going to say no.
Commissioner Thompson,
Aye.
Commissioner Warren,
Aye.
Chair Lazo.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you, Gordon and Amanda and Kevin. And we'll move on to our next item. Okay, it is going to be the return of Ethan Stuckmeyer on item number 7. This time the initiation of Oregon homes and middle housing rulemaking. So no rest for the weary.
That's right. Good morning, commissioners, and thank you, Chair Lazo. My name is Ethan Stuckmeyer, manager of the housing division here at DLCD. As I pull up the slides, today we're here to talk about the initiation of a rulemaking related to housing for the 25-27 biennium. Right. So on the docket for today is to kind of overview what the enabling legislation is, directing the commission to adopt rules. We'll talk a little bit about the rulemaking approach, including what the advisory committee membership is likely to look like, or at least the interest that we'll be soliciting for involvement, the charge, the rulemaking timeline, and this is an action item for commissioners today, hoping for a vote to initiate this rulemaking process. So in the 25 legislative session, the legislature adopted 2 bills related to, or that direct LCDC to adopt rules to further implement. Those 2 bills are House Bill 2138 and House Bill 2258. We'll talk about each of these in a little bit more detail in the following slides, but in summary, 2138 and 2258 serve to, or intended to, further reduce barriers to housing production, affordability, and choice. 2138 does that through the siting and design standard process generally, in creating a framework for certain housing types, middle housing, accessory dwelling units, single room occupancies, and prefabricated and manufactured dwellings. I'll create a framework for those to a statewide framework for the siting and design standards of those for those housing types. There's also an element of 2138 that speaks to development of model system development charges and an assessment of how to use a tool like that going forward. And then 2258 establishes the Oregon Homes Program, which kind of brings together pre-approved building plans and pre-approved or some eligible lots and parcels for use of those pre-approved plans. So let's dive into those 2 bills in a little bit more specific. starting with House Bill 2138. This bill does many things. It's close to 50 pages worth of provisions. And you could summarize the provisions in that bill as reducing development barriers to housing. That's the key purpose, and there are many elements to that. Here is a summary of not all of those. It's not a comprehensive list here, but as they relate to the provisions that are within the realm of land use planning and DLCD's role. So starting with middle housing, 2138 could be viewed, could be described as a follow-up to House Bill 2001 from the 2019 legislative session that enabled the development of the allowance of middle housing statewide. Now, in 2025, 5 years on from the middle housing paradigm in the state, there are lessons learned to be implemented, things that worked well that we could leverage and move further on, and things that are still presenting barriers to middle housing. And generally, these relate to the siting and design standards, or the unreasonableness or the reasonableness of those standards that local governments apply to regulate middle housing. There's also incentives that are included, regulatory incentives or development incentives that are included in this bill, including the some limitations on a local government's ability to require traffic impact reviews for middle housing developments, but also to incentivize the use of middle housing development to achieve particular housing type or characteristic goals, particularly around affordable and accessible units. Moving into middle housing land divisions. So you might remember Senate Bill 458 that passed in the 2021 legislative session. This allows a division of a piece of property, particularly in the context of a middle housing development, to kind of streamline that review process. Again, lessons learned from the implementation of that, and some key questions on the timing of the middle housing land division, especially in the context of a subdivision or larger partition of land, and how those work. That is kind of clarified in some of the provisions of 2138. 2138 also includes a conversation around other housing types, particularly accessory dwelling units, single room occupancies, and prefabricated modular structures. So you could describe the provisions in 2138 related to accessory dwelling units and single room occupancies as receiving the kind of middle housing treatment, so to speak, where HB 2001 from 2019 legislative session and the resulting amendments to Administrative Rule Chapter 660, including Division 46. That's the middle housing division for administrative rules, setting that kind of framework. 2138 asks the department to do something similar, to provide some additional parameters for what is an acceptable standard for accessory dwelling units and single room occupancies that does not exist today. Those requirements and kind of allowable standards are dispersed throughout statute and don't have specific administrative rule language to kind of support that implementation. There's also some conversations in that bill related to clear and objective standards, specifically in the context of tree codes, to ask local governments or direct local governments to establish clear and objective tree code standards. One of the big things here to kind of note, and in that bill 2138, that's not really necessarily directly related to land use or this rulemaking, but an interesting note nonetheless, is that 2138 upon passage established a time that CC&Rs that prohibit middle housing and ADU development would be invalidated because they would be, it articulates that those CC&Rs are contrary to established state policy. So 2138, in addition to those kind of policy provisions, directs the department and the commission to conduct a rulemaking exercise and adopt rules by January 1st of 2028. So in terms of that rulemaking direction, there are 6 specific rulemaking directives in that bill that are incorporated into this rulemaking process. These are, while there are 6 separate things, they're all kind of around the same theme of articulating a framework and establishing a framework for the allowable and reasonable siting and design standards for various housing types. And as you can see on the screen here, there are some specifics called out, particularly manufactured and prefabricated middle housing. One of the things that one of the lessons learned from the middle housing program over the last few years is that there is high interest in using these kind of prefabricated modular structures as middle housing development, but there are still some barriers present to use of that construction type for this housing type. And then, like I mentioned, under number 2 here, kind of providing a little bit more of a framework for the allowable regulations that a local government might apply to accessory dwelling units and single room occupancies. One of the big changes on number 3 here in the 2138 context is that it redefines cottage clusters. The previous definition and statute put a square footage, an objective square footage number associated with that. It was a building footprint of less than 900 square feet to be a cottage cluster. And that was thought to be limiting in its application in development context that necessitated some more flexibility there. And so the new definition for cottage clusters uses the term small footprint or floor area, and the department is LCDC is directed to establish some frameworks for how local governments can implement that term, small footprint or floor area. 4 and 5 are fairly similar to above, just kind of establishing those reasonable and unreasonable, kind of setting the lines, the floor and ceiling of reasonable and unreasonable siting and design standards for middle housing, and that kind of discretionary and clear and objective decision-making and regulatory environment that residential development uses in terms of its regulatory framework in local governments. And I wanted to call out specifically in number 6 here that it also directs the commission to adopt and develop and adopt a model system development charge methodology that can be used statewide. In addition to that, which is optional, specifically optional for local governments to use. However, by January 1st, 2028, it directs the department to publish a recommendations report to the Legislative Assembly on how or should or could that model system development charge be integrated into the kind of action decision-making process at local government level through the use of safe harbor or other means to incentivize the use of that model system development charge methodology. So moving into the other bill here, House Bill 2258. This is generally in kind of colloquially referred to as the Oregon Homes Program. So what is the kind of underlying premise for Oregon Homes, or what's the kind of problem statement here? One of the things that was mentioned often in the consideration of this bill is that there are differing development standards and processes in local governments when it comes to residential development, even in the situations where the exact same residential development is being proposed across jurisdictions. And one of the proposed solutions to that is the Oregon Homes Program, which seeks to match this concept of pre-approved building plans. Some local governments, Eugene included, have things like pre-approved accessory dwelling unit plans that a builder can say, hey, I would like to build that thing, and I don't have to go through, my own architectural process, and I can just use that right off the shelf. That process, that pre-approval of those building plans is incorporated into this Oregon Homes concept. However, what is being added here is that the rules that the department would develop are establishing criteria by which a lot or parcel across the state becomes eligible for use of that pre-approved building plan, where you can kind of match this pre-approval of the actual building itself and this eligibility of the lot and say, because I have both of these circumstances, I'm using something that we've all agreed is the right location and building, I can move through the development process very smoothly and move right into construction and development of that home. So a little bit more detail on that. So what are we talking about when we say Oregon homes or pre-approved plans? It includes a few home types listed here. So attached and detached housing, this includes accessory dwelling units and also, again, that key focus on fabricated and modular structures. And it also includes middle housing types, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, and townhouses. There's an upper limit on the size of those in what Oregon homes can actually be approved, up to 2,200 square feet. And then in cottage clusters and multi-unit dwellings, there's an upper limit of an average of 1,400 square feet per unit. And then there's also consideration for kind of those larger multi-unit developments, but there's a sweet spot that's allowed here. It's with more than 6 units, but less than 12 units. And these are all articulated in the statute in terms of what an Oregon, quote unquote, Oregon home could be pre-approved as. I'm going to back up. And one of the things that's important here is that the Oregon Homes program is the statute directs the Department of Consumer and Business Services, particularly the Building Codes Division, to develop some of these Oregon homes and pre-approve those create, establish, and pre-approve these kind of Oregon home types. There's also an opportunity for builders to apply for their own proprietary versions of these housing types for pre-approval through the Building Codes Division's what they call master planning program. So the state would be providing their own versions of these, but also have the ability to approve other builders' proprietary plans as Oregon homes and seek pre-approval of those for use across the state. So then, in terms of our work at DLCD and as part of the commission's charge, is to establish the kind of eligible lots for use of these Oregon home, these pre-approved plans. There are some eligibility criteria included in statute that are listed here. These speak to the location, the characteristics, the size, and some of the considerations of the timing of those lots, and especially in consideration of recent demolitions that have taken place on those lots. So here's the general frame for the criteria, and the commission's directive is to kind of provide a little bit more detail on the applicable design standards and land use standards that a local government might be able to apply to those development types, and also further defining what that eligibility criteria could look like and how that functions across all of the jurisdictions in the state. One of the key elements here is to also establish what the land use review processes will be for Oregon homes, what level of review are local governments able to apply to those Oregon home approvals, and which ones are they not able to apply. And then a special call out also included in the statute related to standards for tree removal in the context of the development of an Oregon home, and how an eligible lot that has a certain diameter tree should be considered, and what additional considerations need to be made in that context. This one has a little bit of a quicker rulemaking timeline. The commission is directed to adopt the first version of those rules, establishing these parameters you see in the top half of the screen by January 1st of 2027. So moving into the approach, well, first on the policy of it, Chair Lazo, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer those. Make sure we're all.
Great. Thank you for that pause, Ethan. Commissioners, any questions for Ethan about the underlying pieces for the rulemaking here in either of those two pieces of legislation? Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. You know, Cannon Beach has spent an enormous amount of time and thought and passion dealing with the issue of tree removal. I mean, are you prepared to deal with all that?
I think we have to, Commissioner Thompson. It's part of the conversation that we'll be having as part of the rulemaking process of what those standards look like across the state, and try to come to some understanding of how that's going to work in the context of this Oregon Homes program. I think one of the important things to point out here, though, in the Oregon Homes program is that it's intended to be pretty expeditious approval. That's the legislative intent. And so it might take some, it is going to take that work of, having those conversations with local governments about what's important here for your review processes around tree removal and what's important to your community, but also, trying to balance that and implementing the statutory framework as well. So, yeah, I think that's going to be a point of a hot topic of discussion as part of this rulemaking process, certainly.
Thank you.
Probably from a lot of locations. Certainly a big conversation. Great. Other commissioners? I've got a couple questions for you, Ethan. One is we had some discussion yesterday about the model code and some of its impacts on middle housing. You alluded to this notion that there were some other legislative changes to middle housing code that cities would need to adopt that is embedded in the model code. And it seems like this work around 2138, will it also result in potential changes that local cities would need to incorporate in their middle housing code?
Chair Lazo, yes. The changes in 2138 have various effective dates. Some portions of the bill went into effect upon passage and effective date of the bill. Some go into effect January 1st of 2026, some in 27, some in. Also, part of this rulemaking process is that the commission can establish some of the effective dates of some provisions that are part of the rulemaking effort as well. So there are changes that will be happening on kind of a rolling basis for local governments. 2138 also did come with technical assistance funds for local governments to implement some of those provisions, and we actually have been able to allocate those dollars to jurisdictions who have already said, hey, we have these changes that we would like to make in the context of 2138, and we recognize that may need to there may need to be some follow-up funding available for local governments to continue to implement the provisions that are in the actual bill itself, but also to implement the provisions that come about as part of the administrative rulemaking process.
And I'm assuming, or I guess I'm wondering, I would assume that the model code that we were talking about yesterday and the opportunity for a city to adopt it by reference, that our model code would be updated and would follow then that the cities that have adopted it by reference would be updated in the same way without further process.
Sure, that's correct. Yes. So the model code from Senate Bill 1564 is intended to incorporate and be dynamic in that way to, it's one of the benefits of the adoption by reference. And as you're mentioning, that local governments don't have to do that update on their own, and that the department can update the model code given the changes that happen frequently in the legislative concept or in this arena, to kind of keep that as fresh as it can be.
Good, appreciate that thread. I also I have a question about to me, it seems like these two things are fairly distinct, like the 2138 and 2258. And I'm curious about the decision to make one RAC, and particularly having gone through RACs that have had like multiple parts. Like, what are you envisioning the process for delineating the work between these two bills are? Because they're not necessarily parallel, and so and they have different deadlines. So are you going to do the Oregon Homes piece first in the RAC and then do the second piece? There's some base parts that are the same that folks are going to have knowledge about, but otherwise the work seems fairly different to me.
Chair Lazo, that's a great point. I'm happy to elaborate on that right now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so as you're mentioning, yes, you're exactly correct. The proposal
Venn diagram.
I know. The proposed approach is to use a kind of unified rulemaking advisory committee, kind of very much like we mentioned yesterday in the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis kind of approach, that Rulemaking Advisory Committee is intended to be kind of that high level, touching the touch point between statute and the proposed rules, and directionally providing, advice and support, and bouncing those ideas in terms of the higher level themes. But also having a space and opportunity to work with folks who are implementing these provisions, or going to be working in the details, to have that detailed, technical, in the weeds discussion about, not this word, but this other word, or not this parameter, but this other one, or how would this work across these portions of the rules. To have space and time to have those conversations is critically important in developing a rule that's going to work at the end. And the Rulemaking Advisory Committee process, that kind of unified RAC, provides the opportunity to have kind of cross discussions and make sure that while we're crafting rules to kind of work across just 2138, there also potentially may be some overlap or some consideration that, okay, this is happening in the 2258 context, and maybe there's some good, interweaving that we can do, or, oh, that's a good point. This technical advisory committee on 2138 hadn't had this similar kind of conversation that the folks working on the Oregon Homes program did, and we can have that in this more higher level workshop-y kind of space in the Rulemaking Advisory Committee. But to your point, the timing is going to be different for these, but it's important to not wait to start the 2138 discussions and have those 2138 discussions even with the longer time frame, because that time is fairly short to begin with, to have these important conversations that are part of that rulemaking process. So we kind of need to kick them all off at the same time. The RAC provides an opportunity to come back together and think about it a little bit more holistically, and then go into the corners and have those technical discussions and kind of bounce back and forth between the high level and the detailed conversations. So that's the proposed approach and the rationale for a unified Rulemaking Advisory Committee.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of the membership here, this list will look similar, I think, to rulemaking initiations that the commission has had conversations about yesterday and today. However, I wanted to call out a couple specific groups here, knowing that this rulemaking is highly focused on the regulatory environment for residential development. Some of those key stakeholders include, obviously, local government, cities, counties, and regional entities, but also the builders, the folks who are involved in that development process, including both affordable and market rate builders, and then the other, not the folks who are actually constructing the buildings themselves, but also the folks involved in that development process: lenders, contractors, engineers, architects, realtors, property owners. Those folks are key to understanding how these kind of programs can work and what the barriers are, so that we can seek to address those barriers. And then also the folks who have been part of the land use planning process for as long as it's been around, to kind of think through the implications across, all of the statewide planning goals. Another key voice in this conversation. And then the last two here, kind of the actual, not the implementers necessarily of these regulations, but the folks who are actually going to be living in the housing or seeking shelter from these housing types, are key perspectives to hear in terms of how these rules shape up and what the barriers to housing stability and, particular community needs are being addressed in the rules or not, and to kind of keep that rulemaking process, centered around achieving those outcomes of housing affordability and choice.
Thanks, Ethan. Let's pause here for a moment, because I see some hands going up, and it may be about membership again. So I think this gives me the order, but I want to make sure. Commissioner Warren, were you the first person with your hand up? Is it doing it right? I felt like that wasn't the case, but go ahead.
I think so, Chair. Thank you. Ethan, I'm a bit concerned about adding the community members with lived experience of housing stability into this group. I think it's like their voices should be represented. Absolutely. In my experience with groups like this, oftentimes folks like that end up being silenced in the room or felt very uncomfortable in those experiences. And so I just would encourage you all to think about how that's structured in a way that their voices can be heard from like, especially in the other folks who are used to participating in these RACs, and making sure that there's some sort of a structure in place to protect them through that experience.
Yeah, Chair Lazo, can I respond?
Please.
I think that's an astute point, Commissioner Warren, and we have some lessons learned from the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis rulemaking that does include folks on the actual rulemaking advisory committee who have this kind of perspective. One of the things that's important there is to ensure that those folks have a specific and defined opportunity to have their voice in the room, to kind of, carve out some space specifically for that, and to also have the support necessary to encourage and support their involvement in that rulemaking process. So one of the things that we've instituted in the ONA rulemaking was this concept of rulemaking advisory committee buddies. So those folks who have these kind of perspectives or have not participated in a rulemaking advisory committee process have a housing division team member, as their point of contact. And we try to meet with those folks before and after the rulemaking advisory committees, before to obviously kind of prep and talk about the policy, what they're likely to hear, but also after to kind of debrief and see, how did that go for you? How did it work? And then also even outside of the rulemaking advisory committee process, holding those kind of focus groups, small groups, one-on-one conversations with those folks to not have that space be so intimidating, and have that opportunity to kind of have that more one-on-one kind of conversational approach. And also, I think there is a point to identify here, which is that support and those conversations are important, and also building that kind of relationship and capacity to be in those spaces and have those perspectives raised and highlighted in a rulemaking space seems critically important, not just in this like one rulemaking process, but for future rulemaking processes at DLCD as well. But your points are, well taken, and that's going to be a key part of the next few months as we're crafting that rulemaking advisory committee process, membership, the roster, and just the steps.
And just a quick response too, and maybe not directly related to this effort, and I know that this conversation may get tricky. I would love for us at some point to talk about what the department's policies are for compensating folks like this who participate on our RACs. Because I think it's a really important barrier for the state as a whole to overcome, as well as for local governments. Thanks.
Yes, we were able to find a way to compensate some members of the rulemaking advisory committee at the time under the ONA rulemaking.
Nice. Thanks for that observation, Commissioner Warren. And I really have appreciated the lessons learned, Ethan, that you talked about. I did observe those during the ONA RAC process, and I'm hoping it was successful. But I appreciate that the perspectives on both those. Deputy Director or Director, there's some information that. Yeah, I think we've got a moment.
Thank you, Chair Lazo. Director Bateman, and Commissioner Warren, there's a process. Ethan's right. So for some years now, we've tried to offer financial support as well as staff support before and after each meeting for community members who are not professional lobbyists, anyone who wants it, basically. On the financial side, there's a House bill now that standardizes the formula, which is great. So we're turning to use a DAS formula, which is Department of Administrative Services formula, for a daily rate, which I'm just going to make a note of that we should probably say something about that in our announcement, recruiting rulemaking, so that people know that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Really appreciate the efforts on those fronts. Director Bateman.
Just briefly to add to that, Chair. We are also working on an internal.
There you go.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, we're also working on an internal policy so that we can be in complete alignment across the board on that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate the efforts in those areas. All right, let's return to Commissioner questions or comments. Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I agree with what we're doing to broaden the spectrum of participants and to support and value every kind of person who's involved. I love that the housing instability lived experience is both welcomed and effectively supported. I would also speak to, I'm going to use my neighborhood, to some neighbors who have put their life's work into the home that they own. They're concerned about property values. They're concerned about their own physical safety. So to welcome their concerns as well and not demonize them by referring to them as NIMBY or that sort of thing, but to hear the legitimate concerns that they have. And I also understand that I have some neighbors who consider that their extreme wealth should entitle them to control everything and that they aren't bound by the rules of civility. So not everybody is easy to include, but to the extent that we can include everyone and support their effective participation to achieve mutually satisfying conclusions. That's what I hope we're doing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Appreciate the comment. Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you, Chair. I really wanted to say thank you to Commissioner Warren and thank you to the director and Ethan for the work because some of the feedback I heard on the 72 meetings I believe that you had with the rules yesterday, one of the comments was, well, we were just volunteers and the other people are all professional paid staff or attorneys and they felt like they were welcomed, but it is really stressful being on the solar work group. Some of the people said we just can't make it, but then all of a sudden we only had two constituent communities at some of the meetings. One was the conservation and the other was the developers along with staff. And I know there was a really valiant attempt to get everyone else involved, but one person just told me flat out, hey, I've got to work. I don't have time to be doing all of this. And as an agency and as a commission, recognizing that, I want to really compliment Ethan and compliment the director and the deputy director for working on this so that we can get the broadest voice. And then we start ensuring that people aren't left out from commenting. I mean, ultimately, who knows what the direction is going to be. So I really want to say thank you, and thank you for Commissioner Warner for bringing this up.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Bennett. The other thing I think we recognize in this conversation is how impactful the work in housing is across so many different areas, right? And impacts so many different people. Every single person in the state of Oregon is impacted by housing in some way, shape, or form. Ethan, you came off of mute. Is there anything else you want to add to this? Are you ready for your next piece?
I'm ready to move on, but if commissioners still have questions or comments, happy to hear them.
I think we're ready to move forward. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So in terms of the rulemaking charge, so I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but I'll touch on the bullet points here. So the first one is to implement the principles identified in ORS 187A.025. And I'm sure this is, commissioners are like, what is this statute all about? This statute is the rules that were, the statute that kind of framed some of the implementation of ORS 187A. So that is the section of revised statute that speaks to the housing planning framework. And articulated in that statute is some of the kind of core principles that are asked of the Land Conservation Development Commission in adopting rules to implement 187A. And these are things like we should ask local governments to take all of the actions within their control to meet their housing production target. There's articulation of use of these various enforcement tools, things like setting rules to kind of produce equitable housing outcomes. And, the kind of list is long. I think there's 5 or 6 different principles articulated in that statute. So it kind of is baked into the assessment or the foundational inherent assessment that the commission is asked to consider in adopting rules around 187A. So that's why it finds itself in this charge. And then the 2 further bullets are specific to 2138 and 2258 to kind of speak to the core elements and provisions of each of those bills. So on 2138 in the middle bullet, focusing on efficacy of the development process and removing barriers to housing production, particularly on certain types, middle housing, apartments, accessory dwelling units, single room occupancies, manufactured dwellings, and prefabricated dwellings. And then the third on Oregon Homes, establish that clear criteria for encouraging the development of these pre-approved Oregon homes in cities across Oregon. That's the proposed charge. We'll have an opportunity for discussion and commentary on this charge in just a moment, but I'll move into the next piece here, which is the timeline. So hopefully this is easy to follow. I kind of was working on my design skills here, but one of the things to kind of point out is these rolling kind of timeframes here for these various pieces of rulemaking. The important thing to note here is that some of these rules, particularly the 2138 rulemaking, span 2 biennia, which just kind of highlights the time frame that we're working on here. The 2138 rulemaking with that statutory deadline of adopting rules by January 1st of 2028 means that there will be a time in late 2027 where we're having, public hearings and adoption meetings and draft rules and so on and so forth. And kind of targeting probably what is likely to be a December 2027 adoption hearing. At the same time, under 2138, we'll be working on the outside of the actual rules itself around siting and design standards, working on that model system development charge. That conversation will be happening kind of in parallel with that kind of real intentional rulemaking around the development standards, with an adoption also at that same time. That model system development charge methodology will be in the same packet as the 2138 rulemaking and draft rules for adoption December of 2027 likely. But the actual report and recommendations on how to use that model system development charge methodology isn't due to the Legislative Assembly until July 1st of 2028. So some time beyond when the commission adopts to finalize that report. The gleanings from the rulemaking process and the conversation around the methodology happen throughout the development of that methodology, but the final report and the findings and summaries and so on and so forth isn't due until July of 2028. And then the Oregon Homes rulemaking is in the context of this time frame, much shorter. We will be having conversations with you all on draft rules in about a year from now, which is right around the corner in the scheme of this rulemaking timeline, and coming to you periodically throughout 2026 with updates on the Oregon Homes rulemaking process, but also the 2138 rulemaking. And most likely having an adoption hearing in December of 2026 or thereabouts, depending on the schedule for the commission's meetings next year. Any questions on the timeline? Clarities that I can provide?
Appears so. All right.
Okay. Chair Leza, I'll hand this back to you for any broad general questions that the commission might have for discussion.
Oh, All right, colleagues, any other additional questions for Ethan on the initiation of the rulemaking for 2138 and 2258 that we haven't discussed? Commissioner Warren.
Try to keep this brief. I would just advise staff to propose rules that implement the bare minimum of the statutory requirements. Let's really try to slim down the amount of rules that come through this process as much as possible. I think the amount of burden we're placing on locals right now is pretty extreme, and I'm just really concerned about its impacts, A, to our staff, and B, to our local staff as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Warren. Commissioner Thompson.
Thank you, sir. This was so moving. I had to wipe away the tears from how profoundly important this work is, and what Commissioner Warren just said and Commissioner Bennett just echoed. However possible, to prune the administrative burden, recognizing that the FEMA BIOP will be overloading staff, recognizing that so many other complexities of funding and programmatic torque that come from the federal level, whatever we can do. And I applaud and appreciate the skill, the heart, the intelligence that's gone into what's already happened. It's just so impressive and moving. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think, the other, I think we're coming off of a 4-hour hearing yesterday, and that might be impacting our perspective a little, but it is also nice that this charge, does make specific reference to efficiencies and really looking at that development process. So let's hope that that's the way it goes as this moves forward. Ethan, I have a question about, in looking at the rulemaking direction under 2138, there are a couple. Well, the first is the model SDC piece going to the RAC also, or because you have it in separate lines there? So will the RAC be working on that, or is that something just the staff will be working on, not necessarily the RAC?
I think that's a good point, and one of I think that's likely to find some time and space at the Rulemaking Advisory Committee level. Yeah, how that actually functions and the frequency of those touch points is, I think, yet to be determined. But I think it's worthwhile to include that conversation at the Rulemaking Advisory Committee level, and to kind of just make sure that group in particular is aware and following along and hearing the details, and able to provide feedback and influence that development of that methodology. So it maybe can morph into a more 3-circle Venn diagram over the course of the next couple of years, but I think that's a fair point to include that conversation as part of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee scope.
Thanks. Yeah, and obviously you'll have interested parties that will be part of that RAC that will be interested in that conversation. I have another question, but I want to go. Commissioner Bennett, did you raise your hand? Did you have something about the model SDC that you wanted to bring in?
Yes, the SDC discussion is always something that's really a challenge, because quite frankly, yes, you can waive the SDCs, but that certainly isn't fair to everybody that's lived in the city before. And then all of a sudden we end up where we were previously and one of the major, as I actually spent a lot of time lying awake thinking about our discussions yesterday, one of the biggest challenges to development when I talk to cities, at least on the east side, is that they just don't have the money for the infrastructure. And so they're charging horrendous STCs. And so the developers say, we aren't building here because there's no way we can build affordable housing. And so we get into this terrible circle. So then we say, well, we're going to waive the SDCs. And the local folks say, no, you're not, and vote them out of office. And so we're in this quagmire that So I really would encourage a large discussion with elected officials in that portion, maybe as a tack that just says, how are we going to get this funded? Because that's really where it is. And whether you're Portland or whether you're the city of Ontario, you're stuck with this, trying to get this done. And, under one of the federal programs, there were funds for cities to offset that, and now obviously there's been a change in administration, so that becomes a real problem. And I can't encourage enough, and that portion of the discussion, that the group is weighted towards cities, elected public works people, and how are they going to sort it out? Because as the league will tell you, there's a lot of cities that, like counties, are on the financial brink. And so I still want to say that it isn't land use that's really killing a lot of the cities. It's the inability to provide infrastructure to the point where a developer can come in there and build it. And no matter whether we say, fine, everyone can have 200 acres, who's going to pay for the water, sewer, stormwater, sidewalk, streets? And that's, at the end of the day, we've got to settle that as not only LCDC, but as a state and federally, if we're going to really make major headway in the housing piece. But thank you for that. And thank you, Chair, for bringing it up.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Ethan, another piece in the in the 2138 legislation, it's item G, which I'm not sure you touched on, and it seems like it's kind of an add-on. It's this establishing procedures to estimate the reasonable zone capacity of an area as part of an inventory of buildable lands or housing capacity. So it seems like that's something that needs to be revisited. Is that?
Yeah.
So it doesn't look like it. So it looks like it's added on, necessarily something the RAC needs to deal with. But I just caught that it was in there. I'm curious what the work needs to be on that piece.
Yeah, Chair Lazo, that's something that's actually incorporated into the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis rules that are proposed now, particularly around some of the capacity calculations or the discounting of capacity calculations that local governments are afforded in those proposed rules around the likelihood of development in an HCA cycle, so that those reductions over time, those progressing reductions of capacity calculations, is how that's addressed. And that was intended to be part of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis rulemaking, or that's how we're proposing to address that G provision.
Great, thanks. Yeah, that's what it seemed like, but right, good. So we're 2 years ahead of the deadline on that. Nice. Appreciate that. Alrighty, any other questions, comments, or discussion related to initiating the rulemaking for these two housing pieces, Middle Housing and Oregon Homes? If not, I'd be entertaining just a motion on. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Is there one person? Oh, yeah, you're right. I miswrite that on the script. Okay. So if there's no other comments or questions from commissioners, we will move to public comment. And we have one person right now signed up. So we'll go to public comment. Peter Kanegi, are you online with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Hey, thanks for the opportunity. My name is Peter Kanegi. I'm a resident of North Albany and the vice president of the North Albany Neighborhood Association. And our group has been gravely concerned about the long-term unintended side effects to our infrastructure here, particularly our transportation infrastructure in North Albany. And, I've appreciated very much your discussion on this. And it's a challenging topic, but I really hope that the RAC is made up of a broad enough diversity of people and there is some way to allow carve-outs for communities that don't have the infrastructure, transportation, sewer, etc., to make carve-outs so that they are not subject to these increased density rules that 2138 is pushing through. And the other thing on just a comment on who's going to be on your rack. You listed community serving organizations. I hope that that also includes organizations like North Albany Neighborhood Association, who we could be construed to serve, but we're also a organization of interested citizens that care about the future of our neighborhood. And I hope the RAC would be able to include those type of organizations too. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Peter. Appreciate your testimony today and your involvement in these processes. Adam, anybody else signed up for public comment, or anybody online that has come to testify that we don't have on the list? No. All right. If not, then I will entertain a motion with regard to initiating rulemaking for the middle housing and for Oregon Homes. Those motions are on the screen. Commissioner, want to make a motion with regard to these rulemakings? It doesn't obligate you to be on the rack and tack, by the way. So if that's what your concern is, although we could move that
Mr.
way.
Chair, I'll make the motion. I was deferring to our city folks, but let's see. I move the commission initiate rulemaking to implement the provisions of House Bill 2138 and House Bill 2258 and authorize the director to appoint a rulemaking advisory committee consistent with the charge as drafted in the staff report for agenda item number 7.
Thank you. Commissioner Bennett makes a motion. A second.
And Ellen Porter will or Commissioner Porter will second it. And Commissioner Bennett, I apologize. I couldn't get my mute to turn off. So I was trying. Thank you though.
Commissioner Porter seconds. All right. Any further discussion on the initiation of rulemaking for middle housing and Oregon Homes? Adam, will you please call the roll on this vote?
Commissioner Bennett?
Aye.
Order is excused. Commissioner Porter?
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson?
Aye.
Commissioner Warren?
Aye.
Mayor Lazo?
Aye. All right. Thank you all. And thank you, Ethan, for being with us again this morning. Your work here is done now this week. Okay. Small break. Yeah. Why don't we take a real quick break? We're about 8 minutes ahead of schedule. So we'll come back at 11. So we'll come back in 8 minutes and hear from, we'll switch gears a little bit, fly up to 30,000 feet and talk about our upcoming policy agenda with Alexis and his team. So we'll be back at 11. All right, thank you all, and welcome back to the October LCDC meeting. Next up, we're going to hear from Alexis Hammer, and it's going to be agenda item number 8, the policy agenda adoption. Alexis, could you please introduce your team?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Lazo, members of the commission. For the record, my name is Alexis Hammer. I'm the Legislative and Policy Manager. And today I'm joined by Alyssa Bonini, Legislative and Policy Coordinator. I'll let her introduce herself on the record in a moment. And can we get the slides going? Thank you. So, as you all recall, last month we had a presentation on the draft policy agenda. In the ensuing month, or I guess prior to that meeting, and then through that meeting until September 29th or September 30th was the public comment period. And Alyssa, can you go to the next slide? And as you recall, we had a public hearing on September 26th reviewing the policy agenda, which I should have stated in the beginning, just as a reminder, is our policy basically plan for the next for this biennium. And that includes both legislatively directed and agency initiated policy development processes. So we received the comments, have made some alterations to and more clarifications to the policy agenda. And we're here today to review those with you and answer any questions and hopefully move forward with finalizing the policy agenda. So I will pass it over to Alyssa and we can go over what we've heard and what we're clarifying and changing.
All right. Thanks, Alexis. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
All right, Chair Lazo, members of the commission, again, for the record, my name is Alyssa Bonini. As Alexis mentioned, I'm a legislative and policy coordinator here at the department. And I will be walking us through first our legislatively directed work, followed then by our executive branch directed work that we have included in our policy agenda for the 2025-2027 biennium. It feels like we just spoke about a lot of this, so I'll be moving through at a relatively high level. And that said, if you'd like to pause and dig in a little bit deeper, just hop in and we can do that. I'll do my best to monitor hands raised in Zoom, but Alexis, if you can help me keep an eye out for questions, I'd appreciate it. All right, so the first item that we have here on the screen is House Bill 2001. And again, as we've heard, that arose from the 2023 session, and directed the department to create the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis Program, the rulemaking for which began last biennium and will wrap up at the end of the year. The first adoption meeting took place in 2024, and this established programs related to housing compliance and production strategies. The second round of rules you heard about yesterday and have to do with capacity and urbanization. So those are scheduled to come before the commission for adoption in December to meet that statutory deadline of January 1st of 2026. Moving on down the list here, we have House Bill 2258, which we just heard about and rose from the 2025 session, and is a new program that requires the commission to adopt rules establishing that pre-approved site criteria that Ethan just spoke about in depth, which will allow a residential development to be approved by right, as long as the building proposed on that site is one of those pre-approved building plans or part of the master plans program offered by the Department of Consumer and Business Services at the Building Codes Division. So as we just heard, the rulemaking deadline for the site criteria component is January 1st of 2027. All right, just pausing because I thought I heard an audio blip if there's a question before we move on. Okay, moving on down the line, Senate Bill 1129 also was a product of the 2025 session and directs the commission to adopt rules amending the statutes on urban reserves and make clarifications within each level of priority land category. So for instance, this could allow cities to consider lands as a lower priority if they have existing subdivisions or planned unit developments or prove to be difficult to provide with urban services. So again, as Ethan mentioned, this is part of the ONA, the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis rulemaking directed by House Bill 2001 with adoption due by January 1st of 2026. House Bill 2138, again, we just heard about, but just for posterity's sake, I'll give a quick overview. This directs the Commission to adopt rules on middle housing, manufactured middle housing, single room occupancy, and accessory dwelling unit development standards and processes. This was initiated today, and the rule should be adopted by January 1st of 2028. And as Ethan spoke to earlier, there is a whole lot of work included in this bill, so we'll see House Bill 2138 pop up later in this presentation as well, just as we kind of break out those different work streams. And lastly, on this slide, before moving on to the next, is Senate Bill 504, again, a product, excuse me, of the 2025 session, which directs the Commission to adopt rules that allow, define, and provide guidance on non-structural nature-based solutions for shoreline stabilization in estuaries, coastal shorelands, and the ocean shore. That rule adoption is due by January 1st of 2028. So rulemaking is tentatively scheduled to come before the Commission for initiation this coming June 2026. All right, moving right along, I will note there is a slight difference between this slide and the slide in your packet. We had SB 974 on there more than once, so we've removed that from this slide, and we'll speak to that a little bit more on a forthcoming slide. But for now, House Bill 2316 creates a statutory framework for utilizing state-owned lands for housing. It directs the Department of Administrative Services, or DAS, to designate state-owned lands that could potentially be better utilized for housing, which is colloquially called Homestart lands by some. The Housing Accountability and Production Office, or HAPO, will support DAS with developer engagement. They'll support with outreach to help facilitate interest in state-owned lands that could potentially be utilized for housing. And will also help respond to questions about the Department of State Land, State-Owned Lands inventory map. Ethan just spoke with much more knowledge on House Bill 2138 than I possibly could, but here it is again. There is an additional element, as we know, to the middle housing bill that directs the Commission to adopt the model systems development charges method that could incentivize denser housing development and middle housing. So the department will be working on developing this over the next couple of years to meet the statutory adoption deadline of January 1st of 2028. There's also that report due to the legislature 6 months later that would articulate a possible path forward for a legal safe harbor for cities that are interested in using the model SDC method, which again would be optional for local governments to use or not. And finally, for this slide, Senate Bill 1537 is the Governor's Housing Production Bill from the 2024 short session, which created the Joint Housing Accountability and Production Office, HAPO, that we mentioned earlier, between DLCD and the Building Codes Division at the Department of Consumer and Business Services. This bill directs HAPO to produce separate study reports around housing development improvements, which are currently underway and are due back to the legislature in September of next year, 2026. There will be an opportunity for community engagement with each of those studies prior to delivery to the legislature. So that will be early next year. All right. Senate Bill 1564 arose from the 2024 session and directs the Commission to adopt model housing codes for small cities, medium cities, and large cities, which local governments can then adopt by reference in part or in whole, should they choose. This is again meant to facilitate housing production. There's a legislative deadline for the Commission to adopt these codes in January of 2026. House Bill 3409, this is an addition to the policy agenda based on staff feedback. It is our Community Green Infrastructure Report. This enables that House Bill 3409, excuse me, enables the LCD to appoint an advisory committee on community green infrastructure investments to provide consultation on the implementation of the Community Green Infrastructure, or CGI, grant program. The advisory committee is required to submit a report on the implementation of the program to the appropriate interim committee at the legislature by the 15th of September of every even number year. So the first report was submitted on December 13th of 2024. The department accepted applications for that second grant cycle through, I think it was October 13th of this year, and award notifications will be going out this coming January. So very excited about that. As I mentioned, Senate Bill 974 and House Bill 2138 have some conforming rulemaking that we've chosen to kind of address here together. Both passed in the 2025 session and amended statutes related to middle housing, land use approvals, and review timelines. The department anticipates that conforming rulemaking to amend Oregon Administrative Rules 660 Division 46 and other relevant sections of Oregon Administrative Rules to conform with these changes may be necessary. The policy-related amendments are already directed under House Bill 2138, as we learned earlier, but those conforming amendments will need to be complete prior to the January 1st, 2028 deadline. So we're tentatively targeting the Commission's February 2026 meeting for those updates. But I would also defer to Ethan if I've gotten that date wrong. All right. Let's see. We have House Bill 5528. I wonder if that's Senate Bill 5528. Regardless, came out of the department's, but sorry, go ahead, Alexis.
I believe it is House Bill.
House Bill? Okay, I see it both ways. Thank you for clarifying. This came out of the department's budget bill during the 2025 session in the form of a policy option package. And this allows us to analyze and publish a tracker that details the outcomes from state investments in housing production and policies to help identify kind of where projects have been the most successful. So we'll be working on that through January of 2027. And finally, House Bill 4080 was a product of the 2024 session and requires the department to create an offshore wind energy roadmap that defines standards that should be considered related to offshore wind energy development in Oregon, and to submit a final report to the legislature. The original deadline for that report was September of 2025. So House Bill 3963 from the 2025 session does extend that deadline for the department to file the report from this past September to January of 2027, giving us a little bit more time to do that work intentionally and right.
And Alyssa, sorry, it was Senate Bill 5528, not House Bill. My mistake.
Let the record reflect. Senate Bill 5528. Thank you, Alexis. All right, this is the last slide that we have for our legislatively directed work. So I'll move through these relatively quickly. These are all recurring bodies of work. This is not, none of these arise from new legislation, but the employment table arises from our simplified UGB process that we have in rule, which includes an employment table with data that local governments can reference for the simplified UGB process. And this just needs to be updated every time the Oregon Employment Department updates their employment data, just to make sure that there's parity there. Division 1 covers our standards and procedures for rulemaking, so we'll update that to ensure it references the most recent version of the Attorney General's manual, which I believe they just came out with a new one a couple of months ago, so just making sure that those are consistent. And then the Commission updates the housing capacity analysis and housing production strategy schedule on a yearly basis so that local jurisdictions are caught up on when their housing capacity analyses and housing production strategy due dates are. Again, so those are the recurring conforming rulemakings that we have on our policy agenda. For now, And with that, I don't know, Alexis, if we want to pause for questions, if there are any, before moving into our executive branch directed work.
What? I guess I'm not seeing any questions. I would maybe just keep moving since we've already covered this at the last
Sure.
commission.
I know it's a lot of, and we've gone over this before, but it is a lot of information. So wanted to make sure that we provide some space if needed. But continuing on through, so the following slides will dig in a little bit to our executive branch directed work. The first being the Territorial Sea Plan. So as a result of House Bill 4080 as well, it's likely that the the Ocean Policy Advisory Council, or OPAC, will recommend rulemaking to amend Part 5 of the Territorial Sea Plan, which relates to processes that are used to make decisions about renewable energy facility development in the territorial sea and where those developments may happen, with the end goal of really just protecting those areas that are important to renewable marine resources. The exact dates of when this work might occur aren't solid at this time, but would tentatively occur either at the end of this biennium or roll into the next. So because it could tentatively occur at the end of this biennium, we've chosen to include that in the policy agenda just so it's on everybody's radar, but you'll see on the right-hand column with the projected completion date, it is undetermined at this time. So we'll make sure to update that if anything changes. Goal 5, cultural resources rulemaking. The projected completion date is this December. This rulemaking began in 2020 to explore how a new administrative rule for Goal 5 cultural areas could improve protections for areas and items that are sacred to one or more of Oregon's 9 federally recognized tribes. The commission adopted a new rule in 2024, and this chapter of the rulemaking this chapter of the rulemaking that we're currently in addresses 3 additional questions related to who can bring an application, how the application would be processed, and then how that process interfaces with Metro UGB expansions at a very high level. Public comment on those draft rules addressing those 3 topics began on September 2nd, I believe, and will close on October 31st at 11:55 p.m. And then the commission will have an opportunity to consider and adopt these draft rules at its December meeting. Next on the list, we have our Farm and Forest Modernization Agricultural Lands rulemaking. So just by way of background, at its March 2025 meeting, the commission charged the department to undertake a sequence of rulemaking, beginning first with a rulemaking on farm stands, before diving into additional rulemakings on soil reports, replacement dwellings, and agritourism. As we've discussed, the farm stand rulemaking elicited a lot of interest and is currently paused, which makes the timeline for the other rulemakings that come after it difficult to project right now, which is why we've left the projected completion date as undetermined. So even though the timeline to complete the agricultural land rulemakings is undetermined, we just wanted to highlight that it's very much still in our portfolio. We're an agency that's still growing, but we're still a small agency with limited resources. And sometimes this requires us to approach our projects in sequence rather than working on everything simultaneously as we might want. So as I mentioned at your September meeting, we've been working with the Oregon Department of Agriculture in coordination with the governor's office to put next steps in place so that we can wrap up our work on farm stands soon and then move on to the rest of the rulemaking in our farm and forest portfolio. All right. And then lastly, on this slide, we have our greenhouse gas pollution reduction targets. This arises from our climate friendly and equitable communities rulemaking in 2021. These rules require the commission to review the targets at 4-year intervals and to monitor progress on state actions and local implementation, and to then decide if changes to the targets are needed. So staff are planning to bring the report back to the commission in December. And if the commission decides that the target should be updated, then the commission would add another rulemaking to the policy agenda, is my understanding of how that process would work. All right. Next, we have our transportation planning.
Alyssa, sorry, Commissioner Thompson has her hand raised.
Commissioner Thompson, thanks, Alexis.
Can you go back to the previous slide?
Of course.
Because I wasn't here or I forgot, greenhouse gas pollution reduction, why is that the purview of our department instead of somebody like DEQ? I don't understand.
Commissioner Thompson, that's something I probably want to rely on Matt, who I do not believe is here right now, to tell us in detail. I don't know if anyone in the room.
Yeah, Alexis and Commissioner Thompson, I think Deputy Director Green can provide some insight. Well, or something. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you were providing.
Chair Lazo, thank you. I hope to clarify what our role is in terms of greenhouse gas reduction. Commissioner Thompson, thank you for the question. 40% or more of Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions are actually from cars and light trucks. And so that's where urban planning comes in and the climate friendly and equitable communities rules. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Deputy Director Green and Commissioner Thompson for the question. If there are no further questions, I'll move to the next slide.
Thank you.
All right. So our transportation planning rules involve our climate friendly and equitable communities rules. Again, so when those rules were first adopted, there were some pieces about the transportation modeling methods that local governments can utilize that didn't end up getting adopted as part of the original process. So we are planning to revisit and revise this biennium before that 2027 effective date. We just heard about urbanization and wetlands planning rulemaking and a great presentation this morning. The goal of this rulemaking is to clarify and streamline the requirements for cities to complete their local wetlands inventories and to establish a potential pathway for more expedited developments on those lands in certain circumstances, as long as wetlands are avoided. As we heard this morning, we anticipate having a RAC established by the end of next month and the opportunity for the Commission to deliberate and adopt these rules in the summer of 2026. Moving down the list, we have coastal access rulemaking, which we heard from Meg about yesterday at yesterday's meeting. Again, the intent of this rulemaking is to clarify requirements for public access to the beach and Goal 17 coastal shorelands, which broadly requires local governments to protect access points and replace access points to the beach and then replace them if they're lost. So rulemaking initiated yesterday, and the rules are anticipated to come back to the Commission for deliberation and an opportunity for adoption by June of 2026. The last two we have on here are state agency coordination agreements and then the state housing interagency partnership. So beginning with state agency coordination agreements, they are agreements that DLCD has had with other state agencies about how we work together generally, but also within the context of the statewide land use planning program. So many of these agreements are decades out of date. So under the leadership of Director Bateman, we are revisiting and updating those agreements. And finally, we have the State Housing Interagency Partnership, which launched on September 22nd and will facilitate a 9-agency roundtable focusing on interagency coordination around housing production outcomes and how existing state agency programs and resources can be leveraged to advance housing production efforts statewide. So there's a lot going on in the next biennium. Thank you for your input and your attention as we walk through this with you. Our next slide just has a quick overview of some revisions that I spoke to or alluded to briefly. As Alexis mentioned, we had the public comment period open for the policy agenda throughout the month of September. And the major theme that we synthesized from the public comment received was just concern about making sure that the entirety of our Farm and Forest Modernization Program work plan remained on the table as we craft next steps to wrap up the farm stand rulemaking. So we added some language in the policy agenda, really hoping to highlight that all of that, the entirety of that work is in fact in our portfolio still and remains a priority for the agency. As I mentioned, we also included the Community Green Infrastructure Report. We made a couple clerical updates to reflect current staffing on the legislative team. And then we also added a what is consultation question to the Q&A page that precedes the actual policy agenda itself. And this was just to clarify what tribal consultation is in the context of the policy agenda. So you should see those changes reflected in this most recent version. So I'd like to pause again just to make sure that we're providing plenty of space for any questions or discussion from commission members on the policy agenda. Again, we're really excited about the pretty large body of work we have going for us in the next couple of years. Welcome your feedback, your comments, any questions. And in the meantime, we have a sample motion up here for your consideration.
Thank you, Alyssa. Commissioners, any questions or comments for Alexis and Alyssa on the policy agenda items? Alyssa, I had a question, and I'm flipping back to the was the September meeting. I want to see the change to the language that you talked about for, because we received quite a bit of public comment to the farm and forest piece. And I guess I'm not sure when I look at, is the change, well, there's two things. One is the language in the summary doesn't seem to be significantly different. It still talks about the pause. Oh, it looks like we added a sentence that said that it will proceed the farm stand rulemaking. Is that the change that we've added to clarify?
Chair Lazo, members of the commission, I'm trying to pull up the most recent version of the policy agenda on my end, and apologies for not being ready to share that at the outset. But yes, it would have been one sentence just attempting to clarify that once we have concluded the farm stands body of work, then we will roll into that additional agricultural lands rulemaking that is included in our farm and forest work plan.
To be clear, the last sentence in the final proposed policy agenda is the department will continue work on soil reports, replacement dwellings, and agritourism rulemakings when the work related to farm stands has concluded.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Alexis. Yeah, I think that's what I'm seeing is I actually have the two documents side by side here. And then the current policy agenda in the presentation actually doesn't have the Gantt chart either. And I think to me, that was the other thing that seemed to bring attention to it was the I think it was a gray line for that line item. So I don't know.
Chair Lazo, yeah, thank you for flagging that. I think that was a clerical oversight on my end, how we combined the two for formatting purposes or in a different program, which didn't make it together for this meeting specifically, but that chart will be in the final policy agenda, and I actually have it up here too. Nothing has changed in this chart from the previous version. You'll see that I think you mentioned the farm and forest modernization rulemaking. That gray bar caused some concern at the outset. As I mentioned, the only reason that's gray is because we just don't have those date certains for the work that we'll be doing after the farm stand rulemaking, and that's because the farm stand rulemaking is still paused while we identify how to wrap that up right now. But as soon as the farm stands rulemaking is complete, then we'll be able to populate those dates and change that bar. Deputy Director Green, did you have something to add?
Yep, thanks, Chair Lazo. Thanks, Liz. I just want to note for anyone listening or the other commissioners who are following the packet online, Adam did post that as attachment C for this item. So it didn't make it into the printed packet. Apologies, or the first packet, but it is online as well. And as Alyssa said, we'll bind it together for the final. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think again, because we've had lots of different types of public comment on from the broad spectrum from farm stands on down through the other items that are on that agenda to make sure that folks do understand that it is in the plan, it is in the works, and that is what is that's the process at this point. So thank you for attending to those. Commissioner Porter.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chair. Since I was hesitant to bring this one up until you did, so thank you. Yeah, I've gotten a lot of calls and comments from folks in the Southern Oregon region, concerned about the farm and forest, and I totally understand that we're just kind of stuck in a cog right now on that one. But just a request, if you guys could keep us up to date on that as much as possible as we kind of, get rid of that log jam, that would be great.
Absolutely, Commissioner Porter.
Thank you.
Fantastic. All right. Any other comments, questions, or discussion from commissioners on the policy agenda? And we are taking public. No, we're not taking public comment today on this. No. Okay, great. Oh, so we should strike this line down here in this. So with that, I would also would then entertain a motion with regard to our action to adopt and approve the upcoming biennial draft policy agenda for 2025 to 2027 that the team has presented.
Chair, I'm happy to make that motion. I move to approve the 2025-2027 draft policy agenda as presented.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Porter. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. As Commissioner Warren has seconded, we have a motion to adopt and to approve the policy agenda as presented, and a second. Any further discussion from commissioners about the motion? All right, hearing none. Adam, will you please call the roll on this vote?
Commissioner Bennett?
Aye.
Commissioner Porter?
Aye.
Commissioner Thompson?
Aye.
Commissioner Warren?
Aye.
Chair Halova is excused. Chair Lazo?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great, thank you all. And thank you, Alyssa and Alexis.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. Well, thank you all for a productive meeting over the last 2 days. I think we got a lot done in 2 days and online. So I appreciate the work that commissioners did and that the staff have done here. By way of a reminder, we will be meeting again here in the Salem basement hearing room on December 4th and 5th, and it will be, as you have probably realized from the preview from these 2 days, a packed and eventful agenda for those 2 days. Commissioners, please remember to complete your scorecards. You should receive that via email, and so I'm assuming those should just be returned by email back to Adam. Would that be the best way to do that? So if you can, if you need to, I don't know if you can do them electronically, or you could print it out and fill it out and then take a picture of it and send it back, something like that, if you wish. Yeah, so please do that today as soon as you can. Again, as we know, staff use those to make improvements to our meetings and to gauge how things went on this particular agenda. All right, unless there is anything else for the good of the order, we will be adjourned for our October 2025 meeting, and we'll reconvene in December.